I recently got into a deep discussion with a viewer over the root cause of borderline personality disorder. They argued that attributing BPD to sensitive hardware is dismissive because nobody is born scared, so to speak. I love this challenge because it forces us to look at the actual clinical science. So let's start with clarity. We are not born scared. We are not born with complex psychological traits like sensitivity itself. A newborn baby doesn't have the cognitive architecture for that. But what babies are born with is a specific, measurable baseline of physiological reactivity. Since the landmark longitudinal studies of the 1950s and 60s looking at the temperaments of different children, developmental psychologists have known that infants enter the world with distinct, innate nervous system baselines. This isn't an emotional trait, it's hardware plumbing. Some infants are born with a low reactive nervous system that takes a massive amount of environmental stimulation to spike. Others are born with a highly reactive autonomic nervous system. So there's a huge range of variability. But when they have the highly reactive system, it means their physical threat detection system, their heart rate, their cortisol production, their startle reflex, simply registers everyday environmental shifts more intensely. It reacts faster, it peaks at a higher level, and it takes longer to settle back down to zero. It isn't fear and it isn't a psychological flaw, it's a highly amplified biological sort of tuning fork. So BPD develops when that highly sensitive biological temperament meets an environment that cannot accommodate or understand it, what developmental psychologists call a poor goodness of fit. Now, for many individuals, that environment includes severe childhood trauma, abuse, or chaos. In those cases, the trauma writes the psychological software full of hypervigilance, deep-seated fear, and defensive coping mechanisms designed to keep them safe. But a poor fit doesn't require overt trauma. Sometimes the environment is well-meaning, but fundamentally misaligned. It could be a highly structured, emotionally reserved family trying to raise a naturally, deeply expressive, emotionally intense child. When an environment chronically tells a sensitive child that their reactions are wrong, dramatic, or uncalled for, it fails to teach that sensitive hardware how to downregulate. Over time, then, that chronic invalidation, whether born from trauma or a standard environmental mismatch, solidifies into the patterns we diagnose as BPD. And calling it a personality disorder may not be the way of the future. Right now, that's how we label it. And the correlation between BPD and trauma is incredibly high. But saying everyone with BPD has a history of severe trauma is factually incorrect from a clinical standpoint. There's a significant population of individuals who grow up in relatively stable, well-intentioned environments, but whose innate biological emotional vulnerability was so profoundly high that standard everyday invalidation or life stressors were enough to trigger the disorder. Furthermore, we now understand through epigenetics that high maternal stress during pregnancy can pre-sensitize an infant's stress response system in utero. So while you aren't born with the emotion of fear, your biological hardware can literally be primed to react intensely to your environment before you even take your first breath. Not your fault. Acknowledging your innate biological sensitivity isn't dismissive. It's actually deeply validating. It lets individuals who are struggling know that their intense emotional pain isn't a character flaw, a choice, or a personal failure. It's a highly sensitive system that never received the specific, tailored programming it needed to navigate a complicated world. When you stop blaming the hardware, you can finally focus on upgrading your software. As I always say, it's not easy, but it's worth it. So let's talk about it in the comments. Does separating your biological sensitivity from environmental factors give you a clearer picture of how your system operates? Let's connect below.